If the goal at the end of the day is to make as much money as possible to serve stockholders, I don't know how large of a priority responsible gaming or compliance ever will be.
Welcome once again to Low Rollers, the weekly gambling industry podcast presented by CasinoReports.com in partnership with DraftKings Casino. I'm Third Planet Media senior editor Eric Raskin, and I am coming to you from the recent past. At the moment at which you are watching or listening to this, I will be on a brief vacation, so this is all being recorded the week before you're hearing it. And as such, this is a slightly abbreviated episode. I'm not doing an opening news monologue for obvious reasons of timeliness, and I'm not going to do a closing bit either. It's just the interview this week. And the interview is a good one, as I'll be joined momentarily by Brian Joseph, making his second appearance on the podcast. Brian is a freelance writer, contributing semi-regularly here at Casino Reports, and we recently published his exceptional 5-part investigative report on compliance and AML in Las Vegas. So I'll be going inside that article series with Brian. But before I bring on Brian, I want to say a word or two about DraftKings Casino. Big thank you to DraftKings Casino for sponsoring Low Rollers. DraftKings Casino, now the home of Lightning Link High Stakes, one of the world's most popular slot games, a game I've been having fun with lately myself from my home state of Pennsylvania. And yes, I do an embarrassing little fist pump sometimes when I get either the 6 coin symbols for the hold and spin bonus feature or a little more volatile, but sometimes more rewarding, 3 gold suitcases to land my 6 bonus spins. Here's the deal. New players just need to make a minimum of $5 in wagers and they get 1,000 spins, including 500 Lightning Link spins. So new casino players strike now to land this exclusive Flex Spins offer only at DraftKings Casino. For the promotion, you must be 21 years of age, physically present in Connecticut, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or West Virginia. Void in Canada. Eligibility restrictions apply. 1 per new DraftKings Casino customer. Opt-in required. Spins issued as 50 spins per day upon login for 20 days. Game availability may vary. Offer ends August 23rd. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. In Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Okay, let's get to this week's interview. Please enjoy a few seconds of music, and when I come back, I'll be joined by Brian Joseph. There are 2 kinds of people in our industry. Those who read every word of last week's 5-part series, Compliance Confidential by Brian Joseph, and those who had better hurry up and read every word of Compliance Confidential. He is a Las Vegas-based contributor to Casino Reports, the man behind that outstanding piece of investigative reporting that ran all last week that I just referenced, also the man behind the 2024 book, Vegas Concierge, Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America. Brian Joseph, welcome back to Low Rollers.
I'm happy to be here, Eric. Thank you for that really nice introduction. Far better than I deserve.
I don't think so. I think you deserve it. I think you did a bang-up job with the Compliance Confidential series. And so actually where I want to start is to have you back up a little and give me the origin story behind this assignment. Was it your idea? Was it Brett Smiley's idea? Jill Dorson's idea? A mix of ideas? And also just how long did you work on it?
Brett discovered me, for lack of a better term, about a year ago. He saw some work I had done freelancing for a publication in Sacramento where I used to live, where I wrote about some tribal gaming issues and the interaction between California tribal gaming interests and the card rooms in California. And he saw my work and offered me an opportunity to write for Casino Reports. And I wrote, I believe, an initial piece on sort of the political situation in California around gaming. And as we began talking, he began to understand my background in investigative reporting and expressed an interest in doing some sort of investigative project for Casino Reports. What that project would be was sort of up in the air. What would make sense for me, someone who has admittedly reported on the gaming industry to some degree before my association with Casino Reports, but not much in depth. I, did some conference coverage, things of that nature. Nothing as deep as the work that I've done for you folks. And so as I began sort of looking into it and talking with Brett, sort of surveying the situation, I of course became aware of this ongoing AML scandal. And that seemed to be something that I could jump into relatively easily, given my background covering federal criminal issues and my familiarity with government regulatory reports and complaints, things like that. And so while I didn't have a great initial schooling in the gaming industry, I'm very familiar with, federal lawsuits, federal criminal complaints, and then, regulatory complaints. And so my familiarity with those documents made me feel like I could tackle something like this and at least begin to develop the grounding that would be necessary to do a project of this nature.
And so then what was the timeline like from when you decided, all right, I'm diving into this until publication just now?
I think we started in late September of last year, me beginning to chip away at reading all of the complaints and that sort of thing. And then there was a period in the fall after September where I struggled for quite some time trying to find someone to talk to me, which is referenced in the story 5 of this series, the large number of people that, just wouldn't talk. Not unusual in stories of this nature, although the culture of secrecy surrounding Vegas casinos is quite expansive.
All right. Well, so since you brought that up, that is one of the major themes that developed over the course of the piece that you worked into it. The fact that, I guess, sort of the meta story behind the story of the struggle to get people to talk. I'm sure there were a lot of people you wanted to talk to but weren't able to. Single out one or two interview subjects that you wanted that maybe you look back at it as the most frustrating, either because you thought you were going to get someone and then it just didn't quite happen, or because there was someone who was like, man, if I get this person, this is going to blow the whole thing wide open, and you just couldn't get them. Are there one or two that really stand out?
That's a difficult question to answer in a forum like this, because there's so many sources that have reasons for not wanting to talk, that have certain sensitivities that I want to be respectful towards. I will say, generally speaking, however, that there are any number of high-ranking executives that I very much wanted to speak with in a candid, on-the-record situation, and that just was not possible for any number of reasons, and that was incredibly frustrating. Part of my history in journalism was I worked in California, covering California state government for nearly a decade. It was not unusual for high-ranking department officials or for, state senators or state assembly people to not want to speak with me, but more often than not, they would. And these were, elected officials, people with a lot to lose for commenting, if they were to comment. And, more often than not, they would talk to me. Of course, that is changing in environments like Sacramento, but nonetheless, the lack of communication on this story was disturbing to me, and something that I think is becoming all too familiar throughout our country, but is nonetheless something that is very much baked into the culture of the Las Vegas gaming community.
One person that you did talk to that I'm kind of curious for just your read on them was Dreitzer. How forthcoming did you feel he was? I mean, in fairness to him, he did talk to you. A lot of people didn't. He did. And also, in fairness to him, I guess he wasn't the guy in charge when a lot of this was going down, but he still seemed very guarded to me as a reader. What was your feeling of what you got out of Dreitzer and how forthcoming he was with you?
Well, to Mr. Dreitzer's credit, he did give me an hour to speak with. And as that hour was wrapping up and I had a handful of questions left to ask, I said, okay, we're getting to the end here. We need to hurry up. And he said, no, let's finish this. And so I give him a lot of credit for that. That being said, he did have, he did approach, I felt, that interview in a way that was similar to how a politician might approach a conversation like that. He chose his words carefully. And I've had two conversations with him, one for that interview and then one when I first joined Casino Reports as a contributing writer, just to sort of introduce myself. And I've definitely gotten the impression that he's very careful about the words that he uses to the press and the image that he presents to the world. That's interesting to me as someone that's covered government for quite a while. Typically when I think of regulators, I think of regulators as people that are in a position to affect the operations of other people. And while they can be guarded given the politics of their job, tend to be, folks that are maybe a little less concerned about how they are portrayed in the press. What's interesting, I find interesting about the situation in Nevada, but it was probably true in other jurisdictions as well, is, they sort of serve this dual role where they're regulators, but they also want to promote the industry as well. And I think that's an interesting position to be in. The longtime gaming regulator, Richard Schutz, talks about regulatory capture and quite a lot. And I do wonder, having those dual roles, if that's problematic in the gaming community, particularly in Nevada.
Yeah, well, that actually ties in with just sort of the bigger question of compliance and the sort of the conflicts inherent in this industry. There's this obvious clash of competing forces, and we see the same thing with responsible gambling divisions at a lot of companies. What's good for the sustainability of gambling, the reputation of the industry, all of that can be bad for short-term profits. Do you see any sort of solution possible, or is this is the business model? These things will always be at odds, and it's never going to be an easy balance to strike. What's your sort of feeling on that duality?
Well, I mean, I'm someone who values justice and truth and things of that nature. I think when you have the sort of dynamic that you're describing, it's very difficult to get to either of those oftentimes because of those competing interests. I don't know that I have a great, solution given the business model that you described or the regulatory model that you described. But I do think there is an opportunity to be more forthright, to be more direct, to be more just sort of, this is what's going on. Direct, I guess, is the best word for that. In my reporting on this, there felt like there was a lot of dancing around certain realities that everyone knew, but no one wanted to speak. No one wanted to put into words. And I think this story hit home for people because of its willingness to say certain things that people generally dance around.
That's a good way to describe it. Interesting that you pursue truth and justice and believe in those things. So you're the guy. You're the last one of those.
Yeah, it sometimes feels like that, yes.
Yeah. So of the 5-part series, the second part that really focused on Scott Sibella, titled MGM Finds a Fall Guy, that seemed to be the one that got the most traction and really got people talking. First of all, how many episodes of Undercover Boss did you watch as research for the piece?
I've not seen his episode, I'm sad to say.
It kept coming up in there. I was wondering if maybe you had done a deep dive into it, but yeah.
It's claim to fame. And his appearance on Undercover Boss really speaks to his high profile nature, which I think made him a very attractive target for federal law enforcement.
Yeah. And on that point, the sentiment appears to be agreement that indeed he took the fall. Did you hear any of the opposite side of that? Maybe since the story ran, even anyone saying, oh yeah, Sibella got the punishment he deserved. Did there seem to be any counter argument to the suggestion that he was just a fall guy?
I have not heard it yet to me directly in any sort of way. Certainly the coverage around him, when all this went down in late 2023 and 2024 was, seemed to be much more, at least my perception of it, seemed to be much more along the lines of, this is at least a portrayal of, this is a guy that did something seriously wrong. I think that story got a lot of traction, again, because it said certain things that people had been saying privately, but not in a public way.
I mean, you spoke to his lawyers. Was there ever any thought on your part that you might actually get an interview with Sibella? Did that seem like a possibility at any point in the process?
Mr. Sibella declined to be interviewed for that story.
Just like straightforward, you made the contact and he said no, and that was that, basically. Okay. In the end, sort of pulling back, looking at everything that you found here with the way this was all handled in Nevada, do you feel like any real improvements have been made since this all went down? Even if the folks in Nevada mostly just wanted this to go away, that seems to be the prevailing attitude there. Does it feel like, in light of this, that they've tightened things up, that the same mistakes aren't likely to be repeated? Do you get the sense that improvements have been made?
Well, I want to be very clear that, even though I've spent several months looking into this, I'm not an expert, that there are all sorts of, nooks and crannies of this that I don't claim to, deeply knowledgeable on. My impression, however, is that this is a problem that will come up again. We saw this about a decade ago, AML issues being raised in strip casinos as reported in story 4 of the series. And I don't see any reason to suspect that, we're not going to see this again in the coming years. Yes, things have been tightened. Yes, certain regulations have been changed, but you still have these fundamental conflicts between the compliance departments and, the marketing and other departments of casinos. I don't know that that has been addressed in any substantive way. And there's sort of a dual question there, right? There's the question of sort of the structural nature, which we talk a great deal in the story about, particularly as it relates to hosts. Hosts have this compensation package where they receive bonuses based on the play of their clients on their roster. No one's talking about that, which it certainly seems from my reporting that if you eliminated that structure, it would produce less of an incentive for them to protect clients that potentially could be exhibiting red flags. There's that issue, just sort of the structural issue. But then there's also, secondarily, this sort of cultural issue around compliance. And certainly there's a lot of rhetoric that's being talked about right now in Nevada gaming circles, in Las Vegas, about, valuing compliance and taking it seriously. I refer to this in the commentary at the end of the series about sort of the morality play that's being talked about as it relates to compliance. I don't know if that's, just corporate speak or if that's being taken really seriously. And it certainly could be. It certainly could be. There's certainly a chance it could be being taken seriously. But I'm skeptical of anything, whenever you sort of talk about these grand pronouncements that are made in a corporate setting. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about Las Vegas gaming. These are large corporations that are coming down from on high, now about the importance of compliance. You saw the chief executive of Resorts World talking about that, we value compliance over commerce now. Is that just a corporate speak, or is that, real foundational change of the culture there? I think the jury's out, and I think we're going to have to wait and see if things actually change. I don't know if they will or not. Certainly there seems to be a lot of rhetoric about they're taking it seriously. We'll see in the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fundamental issue at the center of all of this, is perfectly summed up in that compliance versus commerce conundrum that exists with casinos. And that's sort of what I was referencing before with like responsible gambling folks, that, the people who work in the responsible gambling division of a company that's trying to make money through having its customers gamble, that most of the people who specialize in responsible gambling do seem to emphasize, we want a sustainable customer, a customer who loses slowly and has fun doing so, and it doesn't get out of control. That's what they say. But at the same time, it's good for business when someone does burn through a couple $1 million haphazardly. So it seems like the same thing is at play with a lot of what you were pursuing here, is that question of compliance versus commerce, and striking that balance.
What I think is interesting about all of this from a macro level is, again, we're talking about large corporations here, publicly traded corporations, although I do know that is changing, at least as it relates to one of these chains. But the fact that these are publicly traded corporations that, have to meet quarterly benchmarks, have to meet quarterly earnings, that changes things. I think, the dynamics of these casinos. It would be a very different conversation we would be having here today if the strip casinos we were talking about were all individually owned. Certainly they would be large businesses, but not corporations that are publicly traded. Once you introduce that dynamic, that changes a lot of the pressures involved. And I just simply don't know if responsible gaming compliance is compatible with the pace and demands of a publicly traded corporation. I just don't. If the goal at the end of the day is to make as much money as possible to serve stockholders, I don't know how large of a priority responsible gaming or compliance ever will be.
That is really key, is how much they're obsessed with pleasing their investors and the stockholders and all that, and it doesn't all align.
Under the way that this is supposed to work, that is supposed to be their number one priority, right? Isn't that, is my understanding? I'm not a good businessman, but as I understand it, your primary job once you become a publicly traded company is to serve your stockholders. And so if that is your number one priority, by definition, those other things become secondary. And they can fall, when a secondary priority can fall way down the list, right? And so I think that becomes a huge concern.
I'm just curious, because this happened to come out around the same time as your article series ran. Did you happen to listen to the ESPN podcast Investigative series on Ippei Mizuhara and Shohei Ohtani that's been running the last couple weeks? I wasn't sure if you had gotten a chance to check that out.
I have not had an opportunity to check that out. I'm sadly, crazy busy freelancer, but I am a big fan of Tisha Thompson, who does excellent work at ESPN.
Right. Okay. I would definitely put that on your to-do list. It's just interesting because of some of the overlaps there. The Matt Bowyer, is it
Warrior?
Boyer, okay. I'm sure they said it correctly on the podcast and I just can't keep it straight. But yeah, so the Matt Boyer, there's that overlap there between what she covered. But it's a very well done podcast series. And so, yeah, I mean, if you do get a chance to listen to it, I'll be curious for your reaction to it.
I would expect nothing less from that crew. They do excellent work.
I'm kind of just curious, are you concerned that you've landed on any shit lists in Nevada by writing this? You do quote that one person who wanted to stay anonymous and said they don't want to be blackballed in the industry. Is there any sort of minor repercussion that concerns you at all from having covered this topic to the extent that you did?
The last two major projects of my journalism career have been Compliance Confidential. And then before that, as you mentioned, my book, Vegas Concierge, which is about, pimps in Vegas. I've ended up on the shit list of a lot of people in this town. I'm certain of it. That's my job, to report things, where the facts lead me. What was the quote from Winston Churchill? If you've made enemies, that's good. It means you stood for something. Again, like to think I stand for, reporting the facts and attempting to get to the truth and having a view towards equity and justice.
All right. Well, I can assure you one shit list you will not be landing on is the low rollers shit list. You are high on our desired guest list, not our shit lists.
It's a great name of a podcast for me because I am definitely not a high roller. So that's perfect.
Yeah, well, same here, obviously. I can't remember when I had you on before whether we talked at all about your gambling predilections, but do you like to gamble a little at low stakes, or are you not really into it at all?
Gambling's fun. I just, I'm a poor freelance journalist. I don't have a lot of poor freelance journalist with a mortgage, a wife, and a daughter. I just don't have a lot of disposable income for that. But in a casino, I know this is, not the most analytical game, but I do enjoy roulette. I think that's quite fun. And when we lived in Sacramento, I had a regular monthly poker group that I adore. I happened to have a freelance assignment in Sacramento in January and got to meet up with my old crew and really love that and would love to develop a group here. Just has never happened, which is sort of ironic given that I live in Vegas. But I love poker. I'm not a hugely serious poker player, though. I mean, when you go to the casinos, everyone's very serious and you can only touch your cards at certain times. Like that's what I'm interested in. I want to play. I want to, lightly tease the people I'm playing against and, hopefully there's a nice spread to eat in between hands. I'm a extremely casual poker player, but enjoy it quite a bit.
I'm good with the social elements of poker. I do like that part, but I will tell you my pet peeve, hopefully you're not this guy, but my pet peeve is the person when we're having our poker game, even if it's casual, it's not too serious, whatever, it's your turn to act and you're telling a story and you're having a conversation. Right. That is like, if you want to chat once you're out of the hands, go right ahead. But when it's your turn to act, play your damn cards.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, good. I'm glad you're not that guy.
But I do enjoy the, getting the opportunity to make fun of the guy next to you or, to talk about whatever. I think that's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, this has been great. I appreciate you coming on Low Rollers again, Brian. Congratulations again on an outstanding article series. I'll let everyone know on Twitter. You can find him at bjoseph1 is the handle to follow. And of course, like I said, if you haven't read the series yet, it is still there. Go to Casino Reports, check it out. Brian, thanks so much for joining me on Low Rollers again.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, my thanks again to Brian, and do check out Compliance Confidential if you missed it. I hope you've enjoyed this slightly abbreviated version of the podcast. A full episode with the return of my opening and closing ramblings is coming next week. But until then, this has been Low Rollers, Small Stakes, and Hot Takes.